IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. Your favorite daily public policy podcast from the Takshashila Institution. I'm Bharat and I have with me my colleague Anushka. And we're talking to Jade Donney, who is the counsellor with the Australian High Commission in New Delhi. Welcome, Jade. Nice to have you here on the podcast. Could you briefly introduce yourself about your work that you've done in the past? And just to set the context, we'll be talking about Australia's new cybersecurity strategy and what that means. So we'll get into a lot of those questions, but a brief introduction talking about what your role is like and especially with the cybersecurity strategy.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. And thank you for having me here. It's great to be in Bengaluru. I'm actually here for the Bengaluru Tech Summit. So it's great to be here and get to meet some people and talk about cyber and critical tech while I'm here. So I guess a bit about me. As you mentioned, I work at the Australian High Commission here in New Delhi, and I represent the Department of Home Affairs in my role. So my primary role is strategic engagement on national security policy matters. So it covers a quite broad remit in that it covers responsibilities that sit within our home affairs portfolio, and that ranges from anything from migration policy right through to cyber and critical tech, but also emergency management policy. So got quite a broad remit, but one of my focus areas is on cyber and critical tech. And recently, on the 22nd of November, we launched our cybersecurity strategy in Australia for 2023 to 2030. So I guess, that's kind of my main interest, my background. I've been in government for over 10 years. I have worked on cyber and critical infrastructure during that time. I've also worked on emergency management policy, crisis coordination and response, as well as a range of other areas. But primarily on national security policy, that's always been an interest of mine.
Thank you so much, Jade, for that introduction. And once again, we're honored to have you here in Namma Bengaluru. And of course, because you've dealt with this issue and it's an interest of yours, it has been for a decade and more. I don't think there'll be a better person to talk about this recently published cybersecurity strategy. So just to quickly give a very brief context to our listeners before we start our discussions with you. The Australian cybersecurity strategy, as Jade mentioned, published on November 22nd, just a week ago. It's quite an elaborate action plan to strengthen cyber maturity, cyber hygiene among Australian businesses, citizens, and it adopts a whole of economy, whole of nation approach, which is refreshing. It also encourages domestic innovation, international cooperation, skilled migration, resilience building, so on and so forth, and its various facets, right? And the goal, which is again divided across timelines that are termed as horizons. The goal ultimately is to attain cyber and critical information infrastructure security and preparedness. And so with that kind of brief understanding and backdrop in our minds, Ms. Donney, with you, we want to delve into the details of this strategy and what all it aims to address and achieve. And so with that, I welcome you again. And my first question, I think as a context setter to you would be, what's the cybersecurity environment like in Australia currently or in the past decade? What have been the key and emerging challenges that have sort of grown to become a national priority or the priority of the government? So what was in mind when policymakers were debating and formulating this strategy? Over to you.
Of course, thank you. And that's an excellent such a very quick snapshot. Thank you. So to give a bit of a scene setter, I think it is important to understand the kind of cybersecurity landscape we face in Australia, but also internationally as well. I think globally we're facing a lot of challenges as there have been advances in technology and the use of technology on a daily basis. That's kind of increased the threat landscape as well. And as those technologies have developed and evolved, our cybersecurity maturity has had to evolve to meet those challenges and threats. So that, I think, the release of the cybersecurity strategy is timely in that, we're constantly in government renewing our focus and looking at new ways to address the risks that we face. And the cybersecurity strategy is, like you say, a whole-of-nation approach to addressing those challenges. So in recent years in Australia, we've faced a significant increase in cyber threats. And those threats have ranged from data breaches right through to ransomware attacks, as well as attacks that not just target government, but target businesses and individuals. So a big part of the cybersecurity strategy is to kind of increase our awareness of cybersecurity and what we can be doing to be more cyber secure and resilient as a nation. So that's where that whole of nation approach comes into it. But yeah, this year alone, we've had some significant challenges with some of our telecommunications providers, with data breaches, right through to technology systems failures that are separate to cyber attacks. But ransomware is at an all-time high, ransomware attacks, and I think that we're seeing that play out globally as well. So I know a lot of countries are thinking about what more they can be doing to ensure their cyber resilience, and that's something that Australia's been very focused on.
Right. So when we talk about the recent cybersecurity strategy document, so can you give us some highlights about how Australia is planning to approach this? You talk about a whole of nation approach, for example, or the different shields that you want to implement over the course of this till 2030, right? That's the time horizon. Yeah. And how are these milestones or the horizons being projected? And can you give us a overview of course, or the highlights of the strategy document?
Yeah, I'll give you a bit of a run through of what some of those are. So you touched on we've got those kind of 3 time horizons in which we're seeking to implement the strategy over, but we've also got 6 cyber shields. And if you'll be forgiven if you get your shields and horizons confused, but I will run through those cyber shields for you. So number 1 is about strong businesses and citizens, and that's really about ensuring that our people and our businesses are better protected from cyber threats, and how we can kind of bounce back from the cyber attacks and challenges that we're facing. So there's a range of initiatives in the strategy that go really to the core of protecting people and businesses. So then to go to number 2, that's about safe technology, and that's ensuring that we can trust the digital products and services that we use are safe, so that we can rely on them and put faith in those products and, be sure that they're not further exposing us on a daily basis. So that'll be really making sure that we are looking at ensuring technology is secure by design and pursuing initiatives to work. We're collaborating internationally, particularly through the Quad, to do that as well. And a lot of that work focuses on standards as well. So yeah, and that really is about just making sure that the tech we use is safe for us to use. Number 3 is world-class threat sharing and blocking. And that's about how we can collaborate, particularly with industry, but also with key international partners on real-time threat sharing and information sharing. It's really helpful particularly when there is a cyber incident or something has happened in another country or with an industry player, that we know what's going on in real time so that we can stop it and stop the impact to individuals, small businesses, big businesses, and really just protect our community from what's going on. And having a sense of what's happening in other parts of the world is always really important, and sharing information so that, we do face a lot of shared challenges together. So having each other's backs is always really helpful when we're facing malicious actors. Number 4 is all about protecting critical infrastructure. So in recent years, we've done a lot of work through the Australian government to uplift the security of our critical infrastructure. We introduced reforms to introduce kind of mandatory reporting of incidents that impact our critical infrastructure assets. But this is really building on that, and it's about ensuring that essential government systems can withstand cyber attacks when they happen, and that we've got that communication with the relevant agencies that need to know to support responses to that. So we are seeing increasing attacks on critical infrastructure, and when we do have an outage, a telecommunications provider, we've had a couple of incidents in recent times that have impacted telecommunications, and that it touches on everything. It touches on people's use of mobile phones, to payments, to lots of things, the way people work. They rely on telecommunications. So really that's about how we can protect those assets and ensure that people are safe and secure and can go about their daily lives. Number 5 is on sovereign capabilities. So that is all about our cyber skills and our cyber workforce and growing that workforce. It's definitely an in-demand skill set, and we're trying to get more people into the cyber and tech workforce, and we are investing a lot of effort into growing our domestic workforce. But a key focus for me, an interest of mine, is bridging that with expertise overseas. And I think that's where India comes into it. I mean, you've got an incredible tech talent pool, particularly in Bengaluru, but in India more broadly. And how can we tap into that resource to, I guess, use it as an opportunity to build our relationship further and draw on those skills to bolster our workforce domestically, and also give experience and opportunities to live and work in Australia as well. So yeah, that's something that I'm really keen to explore while I'm here in Delhi, and now that this cyber strategy has been released, on how we can do that. And then the last one is about our resilient region and global leadership, and that's really about partnering with key allies and enhancing our efforts in the Pacific and with our partners to uplift the cybersecurity of the Pacific region. It's all well and good to kind of just look after ourselves, but being in the Pacific family, as Australia likes to say, we need to ensure that our closest neighbours are also protected from the vulnerabilities that we all face. That's it in a kind of long-winded nutshell, what's in there. But yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that.
Right. Yeah, definitely. So a lot of the questions that we had going through the document also, you touched upon this thing, some of them. And for example, you talked about how collaboration between different international partners is something that's necessary, right from the technology, how it's being built, or to threat perception, identification of threats and sharing that knowledge with other partners. So can you talk a little bit more about where do you see a multilateral approach? You talked about collaboration between the Quad, for example. So what are some of the examples where you see this kind of a multilateral approach being used to ensure cybersecurity is a priority when building these things up?
Yeah, of course. A lot of these kind of multilateral and unilateral forums are quite crucial to building consensus, I suppose, and shaping international norms and behaviours in cybersecurity, but also on standard settings, I think, and coming up with testing ideas with other nations and taking a collaborative approach to how we face the challenges that we face. I know that, some countries are pursuing things, India in particular, so DPI is a clear example of something that India is very, very focused on, and Australia is very, very eager to understand more about. There's a lot that the Quad is doing to, I guess, build consensus and work together on different approaches to ensuring we have safe technology and how we can do that. But as technology evolves, there's a lot of work being done, and that it's covered in this strategy as well, but more broadly on AI in particular, and how we're approaching AI and what we can do to ensure that our citizens are safe as tech does evolve. And yeah, you kind of touched on it there with the threat sharing and blocking. There's always going to be nations that kind of share information with one another, and that at its heart is really just about making sure that we're supporting one another when we are impacted, whether it's by the same malicious actor or we're seeing similar trends, particularly even things just like ransomware attacks. I think it's really important for us to engage with one another to share the things that we're learning.
Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break.
Right. So I think it's also very interesting because this too can emerge as one of the areas where India and Australia can cooperate, because India has been a vocal advocate of the establishment of a points of contact directory globally, which can address the exact kind of challenge that you referenced to, right? Sharing threat intelligence and data about a cybersecurity incident in real time. And I think that will become important as the world becomes increasingly polarized, and at the same time some joint threats call for increased cooperation. And just on one of the other points that you made surrounding migration and sovereign interests, and how that's another field where India and other Australian partners can come into picture vis-a-vis sharing of knowledge and know-how, and of course talent. And so from my understanding, we're also to see a migration strategy come up on the Australian front. And so if I may, could you talk a little bit more about how exactly does the Australian government envision fulfilling the goal for skilled migration? Are there any incentives that are being planned, or is the migration strategy going to address some of these questions?
Of course. Thank you. So the migration strategy hasn't yet been published, and that will come out soon, as kind of indicated by our minister. But one thing that I would kind of flag is that within that migration strategy, what I think we'll see is a big focus on the areas that we are seeing critical skills shortages, and cybersecurity is certainly one of those areas that we know we have skills shortages and we need to address, and it's touched on in the cybersecurity strategy as well. But I think the focus will be understanding where those skills shortages are, and then seeing where we can draw the talent from to address that, and providing mobility pathways to countries. But particularly for me, it's a focus on India and drawing on those pipelines of talent here to provide further opportunities to work and live in Australia, gain experience, bring it back. We've also recently opened the Deakin University campus in Gift City in Gujarat, and one of the first courses being offered at that university is on cybersecurity. So that certainly aligns with that as well. I mean, we're trying as much to kind of build our education and skilling in India as well as back in Australia. So it's really about trying to strengthen that relationship on the education front, the skills front, and then backing it up with the mobility pathways as well.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely interesting, especially considering for Indian students as well, Australia is a hotspot destination. We endeavor to seek some of our higher education in Australia, and we also have a large Australian diaspora living here in India. And of course, with these new UGC and national education policy regulations that allow for the opening of campuses of foreign universities in our country, we're hoping that there'll be more institutional collaboration between India and Australia, and that will definitely be the key to opening the mobilization pathway. Because it familiarizes you with the kind of education system that Australia perhaps.
Of course. Yeah, and I think it'll be great as well to have some of the expertise in Australia come to India by having those universities opening their doors domestically here in India. It brings over new perspectives on things as well, and it further builds that relationship and collaboration. So I think that's a really positive thing.
Jade, so you also, while you were giving an overview, you also touched upon how there's a threat to critical infrastructure. So, like in India also, we have, over the past few years, we have experienced some attacks on, say, the power grids or on healthcare infrastructure. And you see that these can really cripple our response to, say, certain events. Or when you look at building resilience against these kind of attacks, so it might be from a state actor or from non-state actors as well. So what are some of the ways in which you can mitigate such threats, and can you talk a little bit more about this?
Yeah, of course, more than happy to. I think we're facing increasing threats, as you say, to our critical infrastructure, and there are so many critical infrastructure sectors as well, and they range right through from data storage through to transport, through to healthcare, through to food and grocery. It's quite a wide range of how how Australia classes critical infrastructure. It's touches on every part of our society. So when you have one of those sectors impacted by an incident, and this is and protecting our critical infrastructure goes more broader than cybersecurity, and I will try and focus it on cyber, but you can have a natural hazard, for example, impact critical infrastructure. I mean, if it takes out the energy grid and impacts a particular power station, that has massive ripple effects and ramifications. And I think largely our response efforts through our Critical Infrastructure Security Centre are very similar regardless of what the incident and the root cause is. The response will largely be the same in trying to restore services, determine who's been impacted, sharing information, and ultimately trying to get those services back up and running. But in terms of this is in the strategy, we're very focused on ensuring that owners and operators of critical infrastructure have a clear understanding of the risks that they face in relation to cybersecurity. I mean, it's all very well that we kind of expect members of the public and individuals to have their own personal understanding of cybersecurity and support them in that. But it's really about the people that are supporting our individuals and the companies that are providing the services that we rely on to also have that awareness and understanding of what the risks are and the challenges that we face. So there's a lot in there in the sense that government is a bit of a leader of that as well, and we need to lead by example and uplift our own cybersecurity. But in terms of some of the things that we're looking at doing, some of them range from clarifying the scope of critical infrastructure regulation. Sometimes it can be a bit unclear about what regulations apply to critical infrastructure owners and operators, strengthening cybersecurity obligations and compliance. And I think that just means, enforcing the compliance, but also giving operators a clearer understanding of what their obligations actually are. So it's hard to follow something if you don't fully understand it. So there's a big part for us there. Some other parts talk about, the uplift of the cybersecurity of the Australian government as well. And we know that we play such a huge role in the data and information that we have of our private citizens and making sure that we're in a position where we're protecting, and we do it really well. But as I touched on earlier, there's always room for improvement as technology evolves and things change. And to be honest, as the threat actors evolve in their skills and capabilities as well, we certainly can't think that we're always going to have the best knowledge and expertise. They're learning by the day. So we have to kind of meet that as well. So yeah, it's kind of a broad spectrum.
Yeah, like you mentioned, it's not just the infrastructure, but even the data about citizens being stored in data centers and how you safeguard that data and
of course,
the privacy of the citizen that comes with it. You also mentioned earlier about how getting disclosure about any attacks, how you publish that in the open and how you create that awareness, that kind of an environment where operators of this critical infrastructure come out and talk about any attacks that have happened. And so creating that awareness that this has happened and this is how you can possibly mitigate it in the future, sharing that knowledge between not just other operators of this critical infrastructure, but also between multilateral nations. That's something which also could help mitigate such.
Yeah. Transparency is a really big part of how we approach cybersecurity, in the sense that, we do want to educate our citizens and businesses, and part of doing that is showing them examples of things that have happened, and the same with our international partners, even if it's, a domestic matter, it's still really important to kind of highlight the challenges that we face, because no doubt other countries are seeing them as well. So I think that's a really big part, and it's something that our public have, and rightly so, have grown to expect as well. They will hold, I guess, big companies as well as government to account when things do go wrong.
Of course, you've touched on so many important aspects from blocking against cyber threats to international cooperation and some of the mitigation strategies that the document talks about. And going forward, what do you envision are the next steps? Of course, now we have the action plan laid out, and there's the implementation part. And so what would you say are your observations from the Home Ministry or from your deliberations with policy circles surrounding the baby steps towards implementation? And we as I understand it, we also have a consultation paper coming up as a follow-up to this action plan that will be inclusive of, that will comprise a multi-stakeholder approach with industry and businesses involved in it. And so what can we expect from that paper and its contribution to, say, this vision for 2030?
So that's a really good question, and I think we've got the three kind of broad time horizons, the three horizons within the strategy, which cover the time in which we'll be taking to build that cyber resilience. But I think I'd probably start by saying that this is not something we've just started. It's been a bit of a journey in that we undertook quite a thorough consultation process to develop the strategy, and there was heavy involvement from the private sector and the public, and collaborating to share ideas on the challenges that we face. Our discussion paper sought views from the public and private sector on the issues that they want to see reflected in the strategy, and how we can be collectively as a whole nation be addressing those challenges. So together, I think we'll be working to build that resilience. We have, obviously, through our action plan, set up some ambitious initiatives there. Some of those have already started and are well underway, and others are new thinking and new ideas that we'll be working quite closely with key stakeholders on. And the key to that success, I think, as you say, is very much about that regular check-in, that regular engagement. How are we going? What more can we be doing? And I think we will also need to keep in mind that as we pursue and as we go through between now and 2030, we will see new technology, and we will see advances and changes and new threats and challenges. So it's making sure that we're adaptive, and that this strategy isn't binding, and that it's flexible enough to give us the opportunity to respond to the new challenges that we face. But I think this strategy provides us with a really good architecture to do that. It's a really good guide, but it's not binding, I suppose. It gives us that flexibility to adapt as we need to.
So this strategy kind of lays a roadmap to 2030, and it's not a very long time. I mean, it's not very far away, right? So, and there's a lot of ground to cover, and it involves a lot of coordination between different agencies. So what does this journey look like? Any concluding thoughts on how you see it playing out over the next 7 years?
I think it's certainly going to be an iterative process, but a really positive one. I think we've laid the foundations, and now we've got a lot of opportunity to build not just domestically, but engaging in conversations like this and engaging with our international partners is really, really key to that. I've had some really positive reactions from my engagements in India, both with government and private sector so far, and I'm really keen to build on that and also share that thinking back in Australia. And I think, as we mentioned, those international forums, such as those like the Quad, G20 and others, are quite critical to our success as well. So, that's kind of, it's a really positive step for us. There's a lot of work to do, but we will be evaluating our progress and tracking how we're delivering against those key initiatives. So I think we've got the right governance and structures in place to help us succeed.
Ms. Donney, thank you so much for your insights and your time. I think this has been a really fascinating discussion, and I'm sure I speak for Bharat myself as well as the audience that we've really gleaned the highlights from you of the strategy and what the kind of progress looks like for Australia to achieving said cyber and critical infrastructure security. And of course, it also has a lot of lessons for India and Indians, because we have our own struggles with cyber hygiene and cyber maturity. This year, it was announced in June that India will be writing its own cybersecurity strategy. We're yet to see the first draft, but we're hopeful. And so I'm sure that these continued conversations and partnerships with Australia through initiatives like the Quad or the G20 will really aid us develop our own cybersecurity preparedness strategy. So thank you so much once again, Ms. Donney, and thank you, Bharat. Thank you to our listeners for tuning into another episode of All Things Policy. Thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.